Standing up in McKinney. This is According to Callus, episode 651. Having taken the weekend off with some other things going on, I posted the 2 interviews I did with the Daves down in Allen. If you have not listened to them, it's worth your time. You should know who and what you're voting for before you actually do so. So please, if you have not listened and you live in the city of Allen or you're voting in the city of Allen, they should be one and the same. Take the time out, go listen to those episodes. They have been recently reposted, as in last Friday. All right. Today, we're talking about the battle on many fronts. Before we get there, let me remind you, please like, share, and subscribe to this program. The shadow ban is real and brutal, and every little bit helps. Join me on your social media of choice. I have a page and a group at Facebook. I'm a pro at Gab. I drop in at MeWe. And for now, you can still find my audio program over at YouTube. That being said, you know, Podbean is just letting me down again. And while I had received, I guess, some positive feedback and some success, that has evaporated. And I don't know if it's just me or if it's their management or if it really truly is solely the shadow ban. But it is challenging. We're going to have to figure out what we're going to do going forward. I am investigating a couple of other options that I didn't even know existed or were available for me. So I'm hopefully going to have a decision here in the next week. So here we go. On with the program. All right. So it is Monday. All right, this episode's coming out on Monday, the 10th of June, the year of our Lord 2024. It is episode 651. We are talking about the battle on many fronts. So for those of you that are history geeks or war geeks or war history geeks, I guess probably the better way to put it, you know that fighting a war on 2 fronts is a good way to lose, right? It's extremely difficult to be successful when you're fighting an enemy on 2 different sides. Now, everybody points to these United States getting involved in World War II and having a battle on 2 fronts, but what they don't seem to grasp is we weren't actually fighting on our own ground. We were fighting on other people's ground, and we were joining in kind of after the fact. So that changes things up a whole lot. If you look at, Russia, if they were facing both Japan and Germany, they would have been in a much harder spot. As it was, they really only faced down Germany, and they were still getting their butts kicked, much like they did in the previous war cycle, which is why they did some of the things they did post-World War II, and now we're still paying the price and refusing to see the consequences of that behavior. That being said, let us pivot to the subject du jour, right? We in these United States, we in Texas, we're being assaulted on all fronts. Now, you could say it's they hate Christianity. You could say it's they hate conservatives. What I choose to look at it is they are merely promoting the latest perversion. A few years ago it was just sodomy. Sodomy is your friend. Now it's essentially become pedophilia, only they just don't want to admit it. I mean, drag shows with children, I don't know why else you would be doing that, and any mother that would go along with that probably needs to have her head checked, if not just brought up on charges for child abuse, but I digress. If that was the only problem, I mean, if we were just dealing with that issue in the perversion month, that would be one thing, but the fact of the matter is, the church that should be the bulwark, the church that should be the keep, the castle keep, if you will, has been infiltrated and in many cases taken over from the inside. Now, whether you want to blame the seminaries, whether you want to blame the weak churches, whether you want to just say that subversion works long term, and if you're not constantly rooting it out, you're susceptible to losing, all the above can be true, but it doesn't deal with the fact that we, the people, we as individuals, have other options, right? We have a community of our own that we need to protect. And when the churches won't lead and the churches won't protect and the churches have, let's just say, a different set of values or priorities, perhaps the problem is that church. But the church is made up of we the people. So let me ask you, how did that happen? Well, because you're not policing, you're not maintaining, you're not holding the line. So that, again, falls back on we the people. And when I say we the people, there are a whole lot of risk-adverse people that are good people. They're good, solid Christians or conservatives. They just don't want to take risks. They're also conflict adverse. They don't want to fight. And when I say fight, I'm holding up the scare quotes, right? Fighting takes many appearances. We're not talking about duking it out physically. We're talking about both the spiritual, the psychological, the philosophical, the verbal, right? If you're not willing to push back and hold the line, you lose. Every inch you give is actually feet, miles. Because once you're getting off that course, the course correction is much more severe. I saw a meme earlier dealing with the people that deviated out of the Catholic Church. Now, I am not a Catholic, nor do I subscribe to a pope. But if you take their argument, basically, you've deviated from this, and then that group deviated from you, and then that group deviated from the group that deviated from you, and you can see how far things go off course. Now, you can argue that the Protestant Reformation perhaps was a course correction, though as time has gone on, I think it just created a whole lot more courses. And I'm not sure 100% that any one course is the better course, as long as you can keep the simple fact that Jesus Christ is Lord and He died for your salvation. A lot of that other stuff becomes what I would call meaningless secondary issues, but it's really not, because when you ignore the quote-unquote meaningless secondary issues, they subvert, they invert, and they destroy. Whether you want to just talk about egalitarianism or, some other thing that's from, centuries past, that's how it happens. And that's just the church. We're not even talking about the state. So I'm not quite a third of the way in here, but I'm going to pivot now to the state. See, we as conservatives, we as Christians, we believed it was possible to have a neutral state. We believed it was possible that we could have neutral ground. That we could be an even footing, right, in dealing with evil. But what we failed to miss is you gave evil that foothold. You gave the bad guys a beachhead, and now you're fighting a defensive action. Had we done a better job of holding the line and held the state accountable, right? Stay in your lane, state. You have valuable and important tasks to do. Stay on those. And by the state, I just mean any government, just so we're clear. I'm not referring to the state of Texas. I'm saying any state. Now, there are a lot of friends, people that I know that would say, it's all statist nonsense and you should reject all of it. Well, that can be true, but I like an orderly society, right? I don't want pandemonium, and I don't know that society legitimately is going to organize itself. The whole idea behind Hobbes was that you needed to have a sovereign, right? A terrible sovereign, but one that, only got involved in specific things and was directed by we the people. I'm not sure that that's right either, but I certainly understand where he's coming from, right? Order brings society. Society brings success to a degree, or varying degrees, I should say. So when we look at our state, it has now essentially been aligned against us. It's been aligned against anything even nominally conservative. It's been aligned against, quite frankly, Christian ideals or principles. And you wonder, how did this happen? How did we get here? And I'm going to tell you, we did it to ourselves, right? Initially when we had the quote unquote freedom of religion, it was the freedom to worship the Christian God how you saw fit. Yeah, there were some Islamic people that were if not here, certainly involved with what was going on in these United States back in the colonial age. They were mostly harassing our ships and imprisoning and enslaving people, but there's a possibility they might have been doing things that were less aggressive, right? And then, of course, you got to, quote unquote, deal with the Jewish question, right? Well, yeah, there were Hebrew, Jewish, whatever your frame of reference is here, people that were of the Abrahamic religion that were not Christian, that were present in these United States, and quite a large number of them were directly related to our success in becoming an independent nation. So while we don't worship the God the same way they do, and for a long, long time I was willing to accept that, the Hebrew God is Yahweh, which Christians worship under Jesus, right? Hebrews are worshiping Yahweh still, right? I don't know. So I've talked to some other Jewish folks after the Talmud, and they don't maybe see it the same way. They don't maybe see it as the same God. So I don't know. But that's not even a discussion or argument we need to have. I'm just acknowledging that we're a quasi-pluralistic society as far as religions go at the time of our founding. But that First Amendment was specifically built on the notion that the federal government should not tell you how to worship God. They acknowledged a Christian God, and many of the states that were created out of the colonies had their own form of church or a state church. Whether you think that was a good idea or not, that was what was there. But we ceded all of that. We let it all go. And, you can blame the Puritans out of Massachusetts as they became Pilgrims and then they became Universalists, and that happened over time. So it's not like it was just an immediate thing, but it became more about leading a moral life than worship. The concept of can you have a morality, can you have a good morality apart from God, is a vexing one, because evidence would strongly suggest you cannot. Evidence in history would show that, that doesn't turn out too well for those that don't worship the triune God of the Bible, right? Not to say that we get everything right either. I mean, they'll promptly throw the Crusades in your face, and they'll promptly bring up the Inquisition. And I would just calmly reply, tell me, why did the Crusades happen? Do you know? I mean, clearly that area was all Christianized out of Roman paganism. Why were they pushing back the Islamics? Where did they come from? How did they get there? I mean, draw your own conclusions here. It shouldn't be that hard to figure out. The Reconquista took roughly 800 years. When they completed it, then they had the Inquisition, because, quite frankly, there was a whole lot of people that were pretending to be Christians that were not. The Jews had their own little thing, and the Romanian Mohammedans or Islamics or whatever they were calling them at that time, it really doesn't matter. They were there. They just didn't want them to pretend. And when you talk about a pluralistic society, I'm kind of at a loss where you can find one that works well. Because Europe's a mess. Pretty much every Muslim nation that doesn't have how should I put it, a 90 percentile group of Muslims, that they're fighting amongst themselves. Anybody that's not Muslim enough. And so, I mean, this is human nature. But even under the Christian banner, there were the Protestants fighting the Catholics. But in all times, what's been clear to me is a lot of times, no, let me back up a second. At all times, the battle had more to do with earthly power. Sometimes, or many times, they utilized the above earth power as an excuse or a justification for what they were doing. And we all paid a price. Now, I have no doubt in my mind that in the end, every knee will bow and every tongue confess. But until then, we're still supposed to contend for the faith. We're still supposed to be involved. We're still supposed to stand on our principles. We're still supposed to know who we are. And therein lies the rub, right? So the church has failed to hold the line, and the state is now basically aligned against us, right? People have called this negative world. We had a positive world, we went to a neutral world, and now we're in a negative world. Aaron Renn, I believe, is the guy that kind of developed that or ran with it, if you will. So the reality is the church is barely doing enough. The state is aligned against us. And then we have to deal with the idea that business has always gotten a free pass, right? We always saw it as a benign, positive, a net good that we all benefited from. And perhaps that was true when it was small businesses, right? You know, Joe down the road has a cleaner. Bob over there has a mechanic shop. And Jill there runs a restaurant. And Joan there, has bed and breakfast. They're all quote unquote small businesses. They're all involved in their community. They're all integral part of their community. And they're generally aligned with the community. Some would call that conservative, but I'm just going to say aligned with the community. But these giant corporations that are funded by money that cares not about a profit any longer, apparently, they want to push an agenda. And the agenda is definitely not pro-Christian, definitely not pro-conservative, definitely not pro-America, such as it is. They care not one whit for we the people. So you got to ask yourself, how did this happen? Why did this happen? Well, I think realistically you can look no further than the rules for radicals. I think that the actions portrayed there or displayed in that came to fruition. They became a real thing. Now, when you create giant investment companies out of retirement funds so that you have giant pools of money that you can invest at pretty much any whim that you want, and they're taken over by essentially leftists for reasons I'm not quite sure how that happened, but they're there, and they manipulate the market, they manipulate the investments, they start calling things out that they want done because they have controlling interest in the company. So they get to make these decisions, and it doesn't matter what the founder thinks. It doesn't matter what we the people think. It doesn't matter what the people that are actually just trying to make a product or provide a service think, because the people that control the money want this. So the real key issue or question I would bring forward from this is, how did these people get the money? Why do they still have those roles, since at least for the last several years we have found that they're not meeting their fiduciary responsibilities, i.e. they're not making money for these retirement plans, yet they're still there and they still continue to do what it is they're doing, and there seems to be no consequences for that. Now, the old joke is, how do you deal with a communist? Take him on a helicopter ride. So I got to ask myself, at what point are we going to realize that the people that are running our country, both from the company level, the state level, right, government, and quite frankly, some of the church levels, they're not aligned with our principles. They don't want what's best for we the people. They certainly don't care about these United States. How do we deal with that? How do we fight back? What's appropriate? What's a good course of action to do this? And again, keeping in mind, we have a battle on all fronts. And you can't win them all. But you can't take your eyes off of them. You have to watch them. So we've talked about the idea. You start here. You start now. You build your own community. We talked in the past about the notion of the Benedict option, right? Basically, just create little enclaves where we can survive. And in theory, that will work. And in theory, that's a practical way of dealing with it, right? We're just going to retreat, create our own little communities, and separate ourselves out and try and function. And if that was possible, that would be a good option. If there was a probable positive outcome, that would be a good option. But I don't know that we're there anymore. I don't know that anybody's content to leave other people alone, right? We talk about the notion of Karens run everything, or if you prefer Yankees, my preferred term. Thank you, Brian McClanahan. If Yankees are running everything, they're not going to allow you to go do your own thing unsupervised. They know what's best for you, and they're going to make sure you do it. So that kind of transitions into the Boniface option, right? You have to be willing to go in their face and push back. You have to be willing to take a positive step forward and, I guess, exert a certain amount of aggression. Have that toxic masculinity. Wow. Got to utilize some of that masculinity that some of us have left and say, no, we're not going to do that anymore. We're going to do this. And this is why. And we're going to protect our families, and we're going to protect our communities, and we're going to hold the line. But again, where do you start? What's the option? And it's real easy to say start with your community, right? But I would suggest to you, we have three major fronts. And look, you could say education, and I'll probably do another follow-up episode on this at some point. But education is largely an arm of the state. And education, as we currently know it now, doesn't really function independently. It's dependent upon the state. And that leaves us an opportunity, right? The church is supposed to be God's first, right? And God's people ought to be running the church. And if you're going to start in your community, what better community to start in than your own church? You need to take back your own church. When your church starts going off the rails, you need to be willing to say, no, that's wrong. You need to make people uncomfortable. You need to be willing to, quite frankly, say no. And I say this to myself as much as I say it to you, because I witnessed some of this stuff going on, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not okay with this. This seems like a bad idea. This seems like we've been down this road before in Christianity, and it doesn't end up well for us. So at what point can we say no and not be the problem? At one point, are we not being divisive, but we're holding to the truth? At what point do we have a right to say, no, you don't get to do this? Now, the Methodist Church is in the process of disintegrating because those people didn't take action soon enough. And they basically ceded control over the denomination, and now they finally realized that they're the ones that aren't wanted. And they're going to lose control of everything and have to start over. And the sad thing is when they start over and they become successful, the very same people that infected and ruined the church in the first place are going to follow them because they're parasites. And they go to live off of a healthy body. So as I look at my own situation here, at what point is it worth fighting? And at what point is it maybe just better to let it die, to walk away? I'm not suggesting that that's where I'm at personally. I'm just taking it to its hypothetical lens. At what point do we just say, yeah, there's nothing worth here redeeming? And when you're speaking of a church, that's a tough thing, right? I mean, I look at some of the churches that have gone under in the area here. Like, how did that happen? Was it just the burden of debt? Was it just that they went off the rails on one or two things and enough people left that they couldn't pay their bills? How does this happen? And then, of course, there's the whole idea where the church becomes stagnant and they die off, right? Well, when you're not growing, you're dying. And if you're not offering anything to the next generation, you're essentially dying. If your children don't want to return to the church they grew up in, perhaps the problem's with that church and not your children. If we don't have anything to offer the next generation, perhaps we ought to reconsider what we're doing. And I look at that, I just digested what I said here, and I'm thinking, well, it's not only the churches that this is relevant to. But the church is the one that has the most direct, effective, long-term action, right? The church once upon a time was the bedrock of our community. The churches once a time were the impetus for a great many things. Some of those changes or quote-unquote improvements were not. They were negative long-term. They brought about unintended consequences, or perhaps they were intended. We don't really know. So as I stand athwart the crossroads of history and I look and I see, where are we? Where are we going? Why does this look so bad? And quite frankly, why does it look somewhat familiar? What can we do to turn this around? What can we do to effectively fight? Well, I would suggest to you, the idea of a church is it's a voluntary organization where you agree to work with people and study under a person and work for the mutual benefit of all there. And if you can't fix that, you're never going to fix the government, state. If you can't fix that, you're never going to be able to do anything to deal with the businesses that are aligned with you or against you, in this case, more often than not. You want to support the businesses that align with you, but maybe not support those that are aligned against you. I can't really think of a good reason that I'd want to shop at Target any longer. They've made it clear they don't want our business. Yet I'm not willing to say, let's go boycott and we need to run them in the ground. I think that will just naturally happen because if you're not growing, you're dying. I mean, I look at all the other businesses that have closed or are shells of their former selves. How did that happen? Well, you can blame the debt. You can blame the economy. You can blame their bad choices. There's always a consequence. It's just a matter of how fast does it come around. So as we're fighting this battle, as we're looking for a step forward, perhaps we ought to be involved with the thing that we claim is the most important thing in our lives, right? Our faith community. I know this is a touchy subject. And, a lot of pastors struggle with the idea. Well, there are good Christians on both sides of the aisle. Okay. I will freely acknowledge that most candidates are terrible. They say one thing and do another. I will freely acknowledge that we're let down by both sides of the aisle. But at least, in my view, one side of the aisle at least pretends to not see you as the hostile enemy, as a churchgoer. The other side of the aisle does see you as a hostile enemy. So why is it we pretend that people that vote that way, support those things, are not our enemies? Because they see us as the enemy. They see us as the problem. And I would submit to you that perhaps that's where the rot began in the first place. We were so busy wanting to build our churches, wanting to grow, wanting to interact with people, that we failed to police our own. We failed to deal with the people that sowed the seeds of our own destruction. And maybe it didn't happen in a generation. Maybe it didn't happen in 5 years. But if you're not going to say, we hold these truths, and that this is what the word of the Lord says, then you're not serious about your church. You're not serious about your faith. You're not serious about much of anything if you can't even stay on that, because it's purely a volunteer organization. Some would say that they caved to the money. Some would say that they just caved because they had no moral compass. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know what you're experiencing where you're at. But I can tell you from what I've seen, it can be all of the above. So I encourage you. I try and end every episode with encouragement. All is not lost. There is a way forward. It begins with a single step. And I'm asking you to take that step. November's a long way off before we start sweating the load or worrying about something that really shouldn't even be involved in our lives until at the very least the end of August, perhaps September. I'm going to guess the vast majority of the people that are going to vote already know who they're going to vote for. What I'm going to suggest is let's fix our churches while we still can. Let's get back involved in the community and work with the people that we align with to the best of our ability. And with that, this has been According to Callus, and I will see you on the other side.